The war in Ukraine is all about history. Putin has revived the old Russian history. Ukraine is basically Russian and all the rest of it. And he's prepared to go to war for it. It's a war over history.
We spoke earlier about how England's economy is like this, Polish economy is like this. And how do you see Polish economy right now?
Well, I'm not an economist, but it's obvious Polish economy has prospered since the Balcerowicz plan, which is 1991, is obviously a big success. The Polish economy has grown 5 times. In 1991, the Polish economy was the same position as the Ukraine, right, 5 times bigger. You can feel it.
Welcome to Soul Travelers podcast. Today we have special guest, Professor Norman Davies. I would like to thank you so much for coming in. I sent that email randomly about a month ago, hoping that we would get you in, and I couldn't believe, having an email back from you personally.
No problem.
So fantastic to have you in. Today I wanted to talk about some early childhood experiences in Bolton, where you grew up, and to your present time now living in Poland, mainly in Krakow, with your Polish wife. So Professor Davies, you were born in Bolton in 1939, right at the outbreak of the Second World War. And what was it like growing up in Bolton for you?
It's a long story. Bolton, in 1939, was the cotton capital of the world. It's full of mills. There are more cotton mills in Bolton than anywhere else, even more than in Łódź. And that was, as it were, the background of everybody in the town. My grandfather was a Victorian orphan. He lost his parents. I think 7 children brought up in the workhouse in Birmingham. He ran away, came to Bolton, worked in the cotton mill, and became a cotton mill manager, which was something, Edwardian, Lancashire. So that's, as it were, the background. My parents, my aunts and uncles were all affected by, the desire aspiring to get on, But in their background, they had extreme poverty. And yet, they were living comfortable lives. My aunt was the first, not only the first woman in our family to go to university. She went to Cambridge, where they were one of the very first women students. My uncle, who played first-class football and first-class cricket, he went to Manchester University. His studies were paid for by Port Vale Football Club. He refused to take money as a footballer. Amateurs didn't think that was proper, but they paid for him to go to Manchester University. And then the war broke out. He, after 1 year in the university, joined the Royal Flying Corps and crashed. His brother also crashed, my uncle Norman, after whom I'm named, Norman Davies I, died in the First World War. So that's another background. Every British family was, people lost in the war. I was always told, you got to do something because, your uncles couldn't do it and all the rest of it. So I went to Bolton School, played football, very happy, and got into Oxford, which was quite a coup. And then I was thrown into a completely foreign world. Oxford University in 1958 was...
I read somewhere that you were 17 when you first started at Oxford.
I qualified earlier. I was 17 when I got into Oxford. But in those days, it was national service. and the army wouldn't take. Normally, boys went into the army national service for a couple of years and then studied. But because I was 17, neither I signed on for the Navy, but the Navy wouldn't take me at 17, and Oxford wouldn't take me at 17. So I went to France for a year and came back speaking pretty good French. And then I went when I was 18, I went to Oxford, and I said completely foreign world, which I quite enjoyed in the end.
What was Oxford like at 18 years of age? What if you could give us a sort of blast from the past? What kind of music was around, and how was England at that time?
Yeah, I wasn't much into music at the time, but socially, for example, the Magdalen College is Grand College. They didn't have inside toilets. There was outside toilets. First time I go to the toilet, there's a man standing next to me, and I say, hello, I'm Norman. And he said, yes, I'm Lord Bathurst. Sorry? Yes, Lord Bathurst. Call me Lord.
Yeah.
A completely odd experience. I got over it all by playing football. I was captain of football.
What position did you play?
Left half.
Okay.
As they used to say in those days. But half the team were Wycomists, because Winchester plays football, soccer. So we had this sort of English class theatre, the Manchester Grammar School, Bradford Grammar School, Bolton, and then always Wycomists. They'd been in the Scots Guards and whatnot. It was very, it was a learning curve, but I quite enjoyed it, and it was fairly. There's no grief. It was very meritocratic in those days, and sort of we grammar school boys were actually more numerous than the public school boys, so they didn't mess with us much. Yeah. So my recollections of Oxford are very positive, and I was into learning things I'd never taught before. When I finished Oxford, I went to be a school teacher, which is another.
Where was you teaching?
Well, I had a history degree, and I had my eye on a post which never came up. But I took a lot of temporary jobs just so that I would be free if this job came up. So I was a supply teacher. Do you know what a supply teacher is?
I remember.
I used to go to Bolton Education Committee Monday morning and report. They said, "Oh yes, this week, you'll be going to teach music in some school or other, or it's sports master next week, whatever, Latin, anything." And that was a real eye-opener to some of the schools they sent me to. There were still mining villages.
Oh wow!
Outside Bolton,
Yeah.
the Lancashire coalfield, which is now completely closed down. But these mining villages were really tough, and
so the kids were tough.
yeah, I remember there's a place called West Horton. They call it Cowhead City, Cowhead City, and the school was ruled by a gang of youngsters, and I had to teach this gang music. And you sit down and I could play the piano a bit, and they would get up and walk around the room and thump each other. So I said, look, took them out in the afternoon to play football. They had nobody who could play football with them. And I made sure that the gang leader, I tripped him up and came down with him on my knee on the back of his neck. He pushed him in. And he was called Hardman.
Yeah.
And Hardman was, after that, he was my right-hand man.
Okay.
If there's any trouble in the class, I say, Hardman, sort it out. And I got Hardman to sing Quem pastores laudavere, no Latin Christmas carol. And well, that was a formative period of my life. You know, that, if you could do, I could play football, I play the piano, and you know, I managed very well.
You had some bartering tools with them, yeah?
Yeah.
And I think this is way before any kids had any labeling. So any kids had this autism, ADHD.
Well, I came across kids who were self-harming,
Okay.
cutting themselves with razor blades.
In India?
First time I'd ever met that. And then you realise there was, you know, kids with problems, home problems, and so on. But like my answer was, come and play football with us, you know, have a kick around, and that really, yeah, it's a long time ago, but I coped, yeah.
And so I see that you was very interested in maps, stamps, and geography.
Yeah.
Did you always have a fascination for wanting to travel?
Yeah, I had a very good geography master at school. He was also the scoutmaster, and geography was my favourite subject. Thanks to this master, who was actually he was a Cockney. He's called Pip Porter, Harold Porter. He had a very broad Cockney accent, which was a bit odd in Volden. But he was actually very learned guy. He spoke very good French without a Cockney accent. I don't know, he spoke, but he'd, as a geographer, he'd been on some course in France. So he actually taught us geography. This is how I got into Oxford, with French textbooks. And so I was good at geography, I was good at French already, and then I did history as a sort of third subject. And the other thing, every vacation, Harold Porter took us on an expedition. You know, to begin with in England, you know, we went to whatever, Dartmoor or the Lake District. And then we graduated, went to France, canoed down the River Loire. And then the year I left school, we all, with the senior scouts, went to Austria. We got into Yugoslavia, and which was, of course, a communist country. And that's when I first saw as it were, the life behind the Iron Curtain. But for a 16, 17-year-old, it was an absolute eye-opener.
So the first country that you left outside of England, which was?
Well, it was France.
France.
Lots of parents took their children to see the graves of their uncles in France.
Yeah.
Age 11 or 12, we went to. So I knew a bit about France, and then became interested in France, and had this year in France. So I became a French teacher by accident. I applied St Paul's School in London, like #1 school, and they advertised for a history master, and I just graduated in history, so I applied for this. And the porter sent me into the wrong room. There was they were interviewing for a historian and for a French master, and the porter sent me to the wrong room. And in the corridor, I met this man who it turned out to be French, and he was actually from the French lycée. He was examining the pupils for this job. I began talking to him. I said my French was very good in those days. And the end was, I got this job teaching French in front of all the other candidates who were sort of Oxbridge first class. They couldn't speak French. They'd all been studying French, like learning Latin, you know, and Chanson de Roland, all that stuff. And so I ended up teaching French for 2 years in a grand public school.
which seems a bit of a pattern in your life, that you went in one direction and by mistake you'd ended up somewhere else.
The accidents actually determined my future life. Well, going to Poland, 1962. In my last year at Oxford, I began to learn Russian.
Yeah.
There was, I don't know whether you must know Robert Maxwell, this big tycoon.
Yeah.
Who he lived in Headington Hall in Oxford, paid £1 a year rent. Like he was a real rogue. But anyhow, he had this company called Pergamon Press. They were translating scientific works from Russian into English and making a packet by selling these books to libraries and so on. But they needed translators, and he laid on free courses for anybody who wanted to learn Russian. That's how I started. And had things gone normally, I would be somewhere along that track. But I signed up for a group of people going to Moscow who were all learning Russian, right? And we had to buy our train tickets. This is before jet travel. Train tickets to the Soviet frontier.
So how would you get, back in the day, how would you have got there by train? What would have been the sort of
right through Poland? Right?
Yeah, right through.
Yeah, but what happened? We had these tickets. I remember it cost £30, which was a fortune in those days. And we went to the Soviet consulate in Kensington Gardens. And the guy just said, there's no visa. We're not giving you a visa. No reason at all. So everybody scratched their head. Well, what are we going to do? We've got these tickets. And somebody opened a map, and where there was this train going to go, and it was going to go through Poland. So we then went to the Polish embassy, and our leader secretly said, could we possibly go to Poland? We've got these tickets and 30 students. What are we going to do? And the Polish consul came out on the street. This is the Polish communist, right? And he said, anybody who's been refused a visa to the Soviet Union will be very welcome in Poland. I said, all right, all cheered. Off we went to Poland. Complete, no planning, nothing.
So you, back then, what was your sort of, before you even got to Poland, what was your understanding of Poland?
Very little,
Yeah.
very little. We were obviously influenced by this guy saying you'll be very welcome in Poland. But on the way, we went by train to Berlin. And the Berlin Wall had just been built. October 1961, so it was all new. And there was free accommodation for students on condition you visited the wall and sort of heard a propaganda talk about it. So we went to Berlin, stayed in this hostel, and had to listen to this German. And the German was saying, you must be careful. Poland is a very dangerous place. Poles are sort of not civilized people. Barbarians. They've taken half of our German land. We had to listen to this talk, and we thought, God. And then we got to Poland. The first impression was that the students that we met were just normal people. We'd been warned by everybody, including, I think, somebody from the Foreign Office came along and said, you're going behind the Iron Curtain, be careful, don't change money on the black market, don't follow anybody, don't get into anybody's car and all that sort of stuff. And then we arrived in Warsaw.
Do you remember what time of year it was?
It was March. It was very cold.
Was you prepared for the coldness?
Well, I had a duffel coat. So do you remember that duffel coat, the navy duffel coat? Yeah. Navy blue duffel coat, which was pretty good. And but what I remember is turning up and met by this group of students, and said, "Come on, we'll take you for an evening for a drink." And we went to the Palace of Culture, and there was a jazz club.
I heard this. I heard that there
was a jazz club.
was a really good
And we'd
jazz
been
club.
told that jazz was banned, as it was in the Soviet Union. But that was just, you know who was playing the trumpet? I worked out later, recently. It was Tchaikovsky's father. Tchaikovsky was a trumpeter, the father, and had a band. And here were all these Polish students. I don't think I'd been to a jazz club. It might have been in Oxford, once or twice, but it just all seemed sort of normal, relaxed, funny. They were telling jokes.
But that also seems a pattern of what I've learnt in my years living in Poland, is the outside world of what you're told about Poland and coming here and living here is two completely different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, a lot of good-looking girls turned up, and they were telling political jokes. I can remember the first joke, which was, "Why is Poland like a radish?" Why is Poland like? Oh, well, it's white in the inside and red on the outside. But they were completely sort of normal, joking, friendly. And that was the first impression, that this place is not as they've told us.
Yeah.
It's completely different.
I think it was, I first came here in 2017, so it's not that long ago, but still the amount of Brits that I've met living here is very, very small. And for me, it's like it was a best kept secret for a long time. It seems that it's a place where people have, on the outside, have this understanding of what they think Poland is. And then when I came here, I'd moved from Canada. I was living in Vancouver for 4 years. And then I spent a long time traveling for America, taking photos. And when I came to Warsaw for the first time, I'd absolutely fell in love with how the city looked. Even just with old trams, I was just surprised how you still have this remnants of the past still here, which is fantastic to see. And especially Palace of Culture and Science. I know a lot of Polish people don't like this building because of the political things about it, but for me, to have this building in the middle of the city, it was fascinating for me.
But also history. I was in last year in history at Oxford. Right, you come here, you realise that you've not been told anything about the country at all. There's nothing in our course in Oxford, modern history, about Poland. And you sort of stand in front of Wawel Castle in Krakow and say, "God, something must have gone on here." Yeah. And that almost shame that you didn't. They were telling us all this stuff, and you didn't know, nothing to relate to, And the other thing was that the communist regime, history was highly controlled. So that when our group was in Warsaw, came to Warsaw, we had a tour of Warsaw, and they took us to the old town in the Starówka, which had just been rebuilt. And everywhere these pictures of before, the heap of ruins and then the new building. And we were saying, well, what went on here? And the guide just said, "Oh, it was the war." I said, "Yeah, but no. Tell us a bit more about it." "Well, no, it was the war." And she wouldn't say any more, so we sort of persecuted her and said, "Come on." And she said, "Okay, I'll take you into the park." And she was so frightened, she took us into a park. And where there were no microphones, she said, "Yeah, the Warsaw Rising." And she said she'd been told, if she told these British students about the Warsaw Rising, she'd lose her job. Okay. Right? Yeah. And she said, "Over across the river, that's where the Russians were." You go, "Oh, what's going on?" That's what history. And then suddenly you think, this is very interesting.
So I think that the reason why you said a lot of this history wasn't talked about was because communists were blanking out a lot of the history to research further. I think that's something that you mentioned before. So it was hard for you to sort of, first of all, delve into this history.
That was the start of it.
Yeah.
It was sort of forbidden fruit, so it must be interesting. But you know, later I met this Polish girl, and got married, and so on. My father-in-law was extremely interesting character. He'd been in the Nazi concentration camp all the war, but he, as a youngster, he'd fought in the war of 1920 as a 16-year-old volunteer. And in the 1960s, the communist regime wouldn't talk about the war against the Poles had been the Red Army, right? Which doesn't happen. So that was a forbidden subject. You couldn't find it in textbooks, or if they said, you know, there was a brief war and Lenin decided to retreat or something. But you know, and my father-in-law told me in detail about the Battle of Warsaw. And okay, it must have happened, you know. And suddenly you say, well, there's something to research here. Then you go back to England, you find all these books, all the pre-war Polish books were available in, you know, British Museum and that sort of place. So you could research that war of 1920 better in London than you could here.
Was you back and forth in that time?
Yeah, not like it's not as easy as now, but yes, I came every year, and but I was mainly based in London, and after being a school teacher, I you know, got on the academic ladder, and London University began to teach there. But yeah, it's a lot of the attraction was about Polish history. It was a sort of forbidden subject, but in England, it was something nobody knew anything about.
Yeah.
You know, virtually. I had eventually the only post in Great Britain, you know, Professor of Polish History, the only one. There wasn't anybody else.
And if we go back for when you first come here, something that I was interested in asking you, what was the affordability like to be renting an apartment here, buying some dinner and stuff like that? Do you remember what costs it was compared to England at the time, and when you come to Poland during that time?
Um, I can remember that uh, you know, I always liked Polish food. There was never any shortage of food. That was another thing. Um, Later, I went to the Soviet Union, and there were shortages of food. You go to an hotel, and they had nothing in the restaurant, and that sort of thing. But in Poland, uh, yeah, organizationally, it was terrible. Like you go for a restaurant for a meal, you wait for hours and hours. And I remember in Warsaw, um, must have been in 1960s or 70s. There's a restaurant on the old. We went to the Starówka to show them where we'd been as a you know, as a student, and sat around waiting for this meal. It never came. The waiter kept coming. So I called for the Księga Zażaleń. Do you know what that is? The complaints book. Every restaurant had a complaints book. So this complaints book, and I wrote in English, "This is the best meal I've ever had." And they couldn't read it because they thought I'd written, you know, this is the worst restaurant in the world. So suddenly the meal appeared, and you know, we ate it, and the manager came and said, "Thank you, thank you." Well, that's the sort of conditions.
Did the British pound go far when you was?
Oh yeah, but the black markets, you could get from anybody on the street, 10 times as much as they would. But about the poverty, on that first visit, we went to Krakow. And I remember sitting in my duffel coat on the plenty in Krakow. It's like a park with benches all the way. And I was sitting cross-legged on this bench, just watching the world go by. And a woman came up to me and said, she wanted to buy my shoes. There were shortages in the communist world. Like the 1 year or 1 month, there'll be nothing but shoes. Then the next month, there'll be no shoes at all. It was absolutely chaotic. And people would buy anything that was in the shops and then barter it. I bought 3 pairs of shoes, but I was looking for I was looking for a hat or something. Have you got a hat? Yeah, okay. And that's how it worked. You have no idea just how chaotic it was.
That explains a lot for, I think a lot of this is deeply still rooted in Polish people to this day. It's them times, the generations that
women would go out with the shopping bag, not knowing what they were going. They would just buy anything they could find, anything to eat, anything, and then when they got something, they'd bring it home and ask the neighbour, what did you buy?
That's the fascinating thing about Polish food. In England, we're very wasteful, I think, filled with food because we have abundance of it. But people are still regimented here that there will be something left over. You can make a soup out of it. You can do something with it. Nothing goes to waste, which I love about Polish food. Every bit is used up.
No, my wife said just the same. But sure, the communist world, it wasn't as threatening in Poland. Later went to the Soviet Union or Romania. That was a real police state. And in Romania, I went to sign on a summer school. The foreigners were issued a little red card which said permission to talk to a Romanian citizen by the Securitate. And we were supposed to be learning Romanian, and we were told that if you talked, you had to show the card, and the Romanians had a little blue card saying permission to talk to foreigner. Of course, it didn't work. As soon as you brought out your little red card, they'd run, literally. It was as bad as that. In Poland, it was much friendlier and freer. But there was the communist regime. In some areas, it was very oppressive. But the point was, you didn't know what was allowed, what wasn't allowed. All you know is that they could, send the police to pick you up or beat you up, or at any time. And you heard these stories. I never really had any problem. Of course, as a foreigner, I signed on as a doctoral student in Krakow. And as a foreigner, I had to go to the so-called secret police. They weren't secret at all. But you had to go every month and account for what you're doing. And they were saying, oh, yes, we've got your eye on you. We know what you're doing. But that was more or less it. They didn't. was sort of reading history in the library. I wasn't doing anything they really objected to. And it was this feeling of uncertainty which was really upsetting. And you then realize the communist system was very oppressive for Polish people. If you didn't join the party, you wouldn't get any advancement, all that sort of stuff. All the good jobs were reserved for the
best apartments were taken by them as well. What was your most favourite place that you visited in Poland?
My
most favourable place?
Oh, well, I made a point of visiting Poland. I remember going to Gdańsk for the first time and being really, pleased with that. Came to Warsaw quite a lot. No, Krakow was my favourite place, I think, and I'm still connected with Krakow. This year, I'm going to have they call a jubileus, 50 years since I got a doctorate at the university in Krakow. So, and they were very protected of me. It was quite difficult for them, for my professors, to have a foreign student who was interested in, I was interested in 1919 to 20, right? Which was a forbidden subject. So I couldn't register that my doctoral thesis as being about 1920. Well, it could be about 1920, but the title had to be British-Polish relations after the Treaty of Versailles, 1919 to 20. Actually, if it was in it, it was all about the Polish-Soviet War. But the professors said, "Oh, nobody will read it. They'll only read the title." And we got away with it. But had that been discovered, the most would have thrown me out of the country, but they would have lost their jobs probably. But there was this sort of uncertainty. Everybody was sort of risking something. Yeah. And that was not very pleasant. But you find that people, protect you. Like when I first arrived, signed on as a doctoral student, you couldn't choose your own supervisor. And I was given, as a supervisor, a woman called Cecilia Bobinska. I had no idea who she was, but it turned out she was the daughter of the first secretary of the pre-war Communist Party. And her father had been murdered by Stalin. And she was still a communist, right? And I remember talking to me in Russian to see whether I could speak Russian, and I could. And she said, "Oh, your Russian's better than your Polish," sort of thing. Anyhow, a day or two later, one of the historians came up to me and said, "You be careful. Cecilia Bibinski, you've got to find a different supervisor." And, somehow they arranged for her to be replaced by, a more genial character. And in a way, they were risking their careers by taking on somebody like me. But, they did so willingly, and it was sort of built-in resistance to the system.
Did you meet many other Brits in that time?
In Krakow, when I started, this is 1966, you couldn't read the British newspaper in freely. There was one room in a special library where the foreign press came, and you could only get into this with your foreign passport. And the Times, I remember the Times came, but two days late. And it was the only place you could read an English newspaper, right? So you then got to know other people who could read English. And there were only three of us. One was a woman who'd married a Pole before the war, and this English woman was still around. There was an American geologist who was, tapping rocks in the Tatra, and there was me. That was the English-speaking community of Krakow. That's 700,000 people and three English speakers.
I think when I first came here to cut hair and barber, I think I'm still the only English barber living in Poland still to this day.
No, but the three now is probably 3,000 or 30,000. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. When you wrote God's Playground, did you know how groundbreaking it would be for Polish history?
Not at all. When I got this job at London University, I found that there was no textbook of Polish history. And that's for English-speaking students. So I had to write it myself. So I sat down, and I remember the first year, my boss, Professor Watson, who was some very aristocratic, casual guys. Oh yes, 100 lectures. No, you just write them up, and no problem. So I had to prepare 100 lectures. And then those lectures are the basis of writing God's Playground. I producing a textbook in English for English-speaking students. That's the origin of God's Playground. It actually started just as collections of lectures, but it was chronological, and I put it all together and realized it would be, there was no such book in existence. And it was published in 1981. The best day that could possibly have happened, it was the day after Jaruzelski's coup, right? So the whole world for the first time, was interested in what happened in Poland, and there was this book, The History of Poland. So it was a big success. But it couldn't take it to Poland. If it was found at the frontier, it was confiscated. Nonetheless, there were people who knew, and a Catholic publisher decided he would have it translated. Although there's no question of it being published, didn't it? But with my help and a young woman in Krakow, we translated the whole book. And it was called Doshu Slady. Put it in the door. It was just waiting. And we didn't know whether it would ever be published, in 10 years' time, 20 years, 50 years' time. Right? Suddenly, 1989, that was only 4 years later, the telephone rang to this publisher, the last Minister of Culture from the Communist government, who happened to be a professor from Krakow. No, started czas na Davisa. The time is right for days. Can you have it published? Can you have it translated? No, it's already translated. Okay. And it came out at 39 in 89.
How big was the success in that first year?
Sorry?
How big was the success in that year?
Oh, not immediately. First of all, it had to go through the censorship.
Okay.
And the censorship decided they wouldn't publish volume 2, they'd only publish volume 1, which was up to the partitions. And this is really interesting. The Polish censorship had no comments, but they had to send it to the Soviet embassy for their approval. And the Russians, the embassy in Warsaw, again, had no comment, except I had a couple of pages about Kurski, who was a Russian aristocrat, 16th century, who fled from Russia and wrote reports critical of Ivan the Terrible. So in Russia, he's viewed as a terrible traitor. And in 1989, the Soviet embassy would not allow you to write to their crutch. That was the only 2 pages that were cut out.
Where did the name? Where did you think of God's Playground? Where did the name come from? Is that something that came up straight away, or did you?
I'm outdoors, so reader of Polish poetry, and I knew that the book needed some sort of title, not just history of Poland, and the word Boże Disco came from a sonnet by Kochanowski, And I thought that's a nice, catchy phrase. And then there was I had a colleague in London who was professor of Polish literature, and we discussed at some point what does Bolszewisko really mean, and there was a bit of an argument over that. But I thought, no, it sounds right to me.
It's a fantastic name. It's such a fantastic name. If you was to choose an era of Polish history as a favorite, what would you say would be your favorite?
Oh dear. Yeah, I think the Commonwealth, when Poland was completely different as it later became, we're quite interested in it now. When Ukraine was in the Kingdom of Poland,
Yeah.
the whole of the Kresy, Lithuania, Belarus, and all that, and that is absolutely fascinating. And almost unknown in the English world.
Yeah, I mean, Lithuania had one of the biggest empires at one point, right? It was a huge place.
I have a pupil, Robert Frost, like he's hit the trading age now, but he has produced the first serious academic.
I saw an interview with you guys, one American, I think, and you guys were going back and forth. I think he was. Is he pre 1700s?
Yeah.
Yes. I watched this interview. Fascinating stuff.
No, he's a Scot. He's really very good, and but one of the few, and was just a handful of us.
So maybe he would be interested in this latest DNA about Scottish being.
Well, I won't drop the line.
Yeah, it's apparently it's with Wrocław University that they discovered that PS could have been Scottish. Yeah, maybe it explains the love of alcohol in the country with some Scottish DNA. What about, how do you see Poland's economy now compared? Because we spoke earlier about how England's economy is like this, Polish economy is like this, and how do you see Polish economy right now?
Well, I'm not an economist, but it's obvious that the Polish economy has prospered since the Balcerowicz Plan, which is 1991. It is obviously a big success. The Polish economy has grown 5 times. In 1991, the Polish economy was the same position as the Ukraine, right? 5 times bigger. And you can feel it. New car services are
People eating out, restaurants all the time.
Standard of living is going up all the time. All the price of houses is sort of a good indication. But like we bought, for my wife, exchanged a flat in Krakow in 1999. I couldn't possibly afford to buy our own flat now. It's just the economy has ballooned, which is very interesting. Why Poland is the only European country which wasn't affected seriously by the financial crash of 2008. Like the GDP kept growing, and the larger economy is allowing them to, for example, to build the Boost army. Oh, I think it's the biggest army in European NATO after the.
Yeah, I read that somewhere.
Yeah. All these autostrada, new roads. The roads in Poland used to be, a danger to drive on.
Horse and car. Now you can get to east of Poland in under 3 hours.
No, the standard of living is clearly.
I think it's better than UK right now. I was back a few months ago, and I was absolutely shocked of what you can get in London to rent as opposed to what you can have in Warsaw. And I think a lot of Polish people that haven't lived in England or even visited. Some of my clients had been, and they were shocked. One client of mine was going to study in the UK and was shocked that people were actually renting a cupboard space as a room. Whereas if you come to Warsaw, you can have a fantastic place to.
My younger son, who's a journalist, is working abroad. He said he won't come back to London. Like, he can't afford to live.
You would have to live with somebody.
Yeah. And I saw some of the places he rented, which is sort of 10 years ago when he was in his 20s. But yeah, that's fine. The sort of living conditions were pretty shocking for a young person. And it is very obvious that in Poland, gap between the rich and the poor is just
Bigger and bigger.
And you get these very affluent people with very flashy cars, and then you get, and I told you, Blackbird Leys in Oxford, council estates which are sinks, they really awful.
Yeah, working class are really struggling in the UK now. I think that the divide is bigger than ever. Looking ahead, after a lifetime between both countries, how do you see hope in Poland, and how do you think the future will play out for Poland if the economy carries on the way it's going?
I think Poland's future depends on the international situation. My view is that Putin is never going to conquer Ukraine. I think he's bitten up more than he can chew, even if he gets some sort of so-called victory. And I don't think Ukraine is an enormous country. I don't think the Russians can really subdue it. But there's going to be some sort of collapse in Russia. I think they're spending, I think it's 40% of their budget on the war. That will have consequences. I think it's nail biting, but I don't think Poland will have to, go to war or be attacked, which would be very dangerous. I think the fears about Germany in Poland are exaggerated. It's the first time in history that Poland's had a bigger army as But Germans are probably thinking that I think the Poles want to invade us, which they're not. But yes, the sort of balance of in the world is really changed, and politically the Poles are part of the core of the European Union. The biggest danger, of course, is if the populists take over in Poland and do what that Trump is doing to stay. Trump is destroying the preeminence of the United States, and I would think that would be the biggest danger for Poland. It is that not just that in the populists, we call the populists, Nawrocki and co, take over Poland to get while other similar people take over, say Germany, the FD, or the France, i.e. the European Union, takes on that shape. So that would be my main fear. Otherwise, I think Poland is well set for a decade or two of the good life.
And lastly, how do you see the future for future historians with a lifetime dedicated to researching history? How do you see with technology now, with AI, like we spoke before, how do you see future historians discovering the way that you had to with researching books and old papers? How do you see the future of historians?
I think there's very few Western historians capable of coming to Eastern Europe and the former Eastern Europe and understanding it. Very few Western historians learn Polish or any of the other languages. And I think there is a problem with Polish historians. They're sort of very parochial. It's just circumstances have combined against them so that they study the minutiae of Polish history too much and too little about Poland in its context. Uh, so one thing that really worries me at the moment is that knowledge of Poland in the West, in Britain, America, and so on, is very, very weak.
I don't think it's changed much even since you wrote books, right?
There's only one endowed post in Polish studies in the whole of Great Britain. One. There are 250,000 university posts by 160 universities. 250,000 academics. There's only one in Cambridge which has an endowed post. This is nothing. It's a one-man show. A very good man called Stanley Bill, who's you should get hold of him if he's an Australian.
Okay.
He says the better version of Norman Davies, 40 years younger. So speaks beautiful Polish wife. He's fully Polonized, but he's one in a sea of academics who don't understand anything. I only got the job for writing the Oxford History of Europe, which usually is accepted #1 bestseller, right? But I only got that job because it was the year of Gorbachev, and Oxford University Press thought the history of Europe should include Eastern Europe as well. I mean, it's a revelation. So they invited all the leading European historians at Oxford. They came along, and none of them knew any Eastern language, Eastern European language at all. None. Right? It's Oxford University. But none of them was capable of writing a book about the whole of Europe. And I'd already written God's Play Man, published by Oxford University, Oxford History of Poland, right? So the editors called me in, and I remember I sat by there and said, Norman, do you know anything about Westall? I used to be a French teacher. So you know something about France? Yeah. How about Italy? Well, Italy was a special subject in Oxford. And you know Polish, and you know Russian. Like, you're unique. There's nobody in France for two. And it's basic stuff, right?
Yeah.
Robert Frost is even better linguist than I am. But the number of British academics who are capable of studying, this part of the world, you count them on your hand. And it's very worrying. I've tried to organize programs of study in Oxford, all collapsed. And the problem isn't money. The problem is universities who have no room for new subjects. They all have to have, computer studies, artificial intelligence, Chinese, all these new. And you go along to, I think you could have a program of Polish studies, and they look at youth. To say East European, sorry. That is like that.
And it's fascinating because it's not so far away. And it's still so the connection between those two countries. If you look at our history, if you look at the Second World War, if you delve further, there's always been a connection there.
Yeah, and Warsaw is closer to London than Madrid, Rome. Not Paris is big close. So that I think, lots of countries in Western Europe are actually further away from London than Poland is. But there's been this mental iron curtain for, not just in the communist times before, Britain's alliances with Russia in all the world wars has been very detrimental to Polish things.
Yeah. And lastly, last question, because I know you're a busy man. How important is history for our future?
Well, absolutely crucial. As I say, if you don't know where you come from, you can't work out where you're supposed to be going. And like the war in Ukraine is all about history. Putin has revived the old Russian history. You know, Ukraine is basically Russian and all the rest of it. And he's prepared to go to war for it.
Mhm.
It's a war over history.
Yeah.
And yeah, and history is absolutely vital to all the other subjects because they all subjects develop. You got to know where knowledge comes from in any field in order to understand where you are and what the next steps were going to be. So yeah, I think history is vital, and it's not ideal what the way that it's taught and studied, and there are lots of lacuna and black holes and whatever white patches. But you know, I've done what I can. I'm still writing history. Get up every morning. I wrote a page or two this morning.
Fantastic. And it's been an absolute pleasure having you in. Maybe we'll do a part 2, who knows? There's plenty more to talk about. Thank you very much, Norman.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
Pleasure, thank you.